Have a good night, son. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Get some good rest. Mija, I know you have a big test tonight, but it's getting late. Try and get some sleep. Hey, you kids be careful tonight. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. These are the words that have been spoken in thousands of households across the country in just any other typical evening. Little did family members know that those would have been the last words that were spoken to their loved ones. At DEA headquarters in our lobby, we have the faces of fentanyl. Lives taken much too soon. Every race, ethnicity, gender, age, they're all represented here. One might argue that diversity is always a great thing. Not here. Not when there is an equal opportunity killer amongst us. And that is illicit fentanyl. Toxicology reports seen here all share a similar horrific pattern. Parents have had to understand what they are and what they mean, and they all point to one thing: deadly doses of fentanyl in their loved one's bloodstream. You might be saying, though, hold on a second. I've been in the medical community for years. We've been around fentanyl. I've prescribed fentanyl. I've used it in an operating room. Well, yes, that may be true. Fentanyl is an anesthetic. Fentanyl is also a pain reliever, prescribed many times to those suffering with terminal illness or chronic pain. But unfortunately, that good has turned to bad. China and Mexico, organizations operating in that criminal environment, have begun to manufacture illicit fentanyl. Illicit fentanyl pressed into pills that make it look like the real thing. You might say, okay, hold on a second. We've heard this before. Drug trends come and go. Different drugs peak and then go away. From the cocaine cowboy days of the 1980s to the crack epidemic of the 90s, meth labs in the 2000s. So what's the big deal? Is this just another drug that is going to come and then get replaced by another one, and every time one is more deadlier than the next? This is different. What you see here on the tip of a pencil is a lethal dose of illicit fentanyl. Just 2 milligrams, just a few grains, is considered the difference between life and death. 107,000 lives lost due to drug abuse last year alone. That's why it matters. Over 2/3 of those as a result of an opioid, much like fentanyl. The method that drug traffickers have introduced this is ingenious. In a pill. I guarantee you, everybody here, me included, at some point were taught how to swallow a pill. You were taught because you couldn't take that liquid antibiotic anymore, or that liquid ibuprofen, and you had to learn how to swallow a pill. Or we've taught our children, hey, if you're going to be a big boy and girl, you got to step away from those chewable vitamins and learn to swallow one instead. So a pill, to most of us, is very disarming. You see a couple pills on a bedroom nightstand or in a baggie in a backpack, you're not going to really think twice about it because it's just a part of it, part of our society. It's not like if I would have taken out a glass pipe and loaded up a few grams of methamphetamine and turned and said, here, take a smoke. Very different. That is the delivery method that drug trafficking organizations have opted to introduce this fentanyl. The biggest thing that they're lacking, however, is quality control. Clandestine labs, primarily operating in Mexico, are lacking one of the most fundamental things that any pharmaceutical manufacturer has to achieve, and that's quality control. The redundancy, the testing, evaluating, going back and testing again, and evaluating their product to make sure, one, that the active ingredient is diffused equally throughout the entire pill. So if you do cut it in half, you're essentially getting half the dosage. The other thing is that you want to make sure that that first pill is identical to the millionth pill coming off that assembly line. This is not happening here. These drug traffickers have figured out that if we make it look like something people are used to seeing, they will be less risk averse. They'll be interested in taking it. Look, let's be real. You probably cannot get through a morning newscast or an evening of prime time without seeing a dozen commercials about the latest medication. It's part of our society, and it disarms all of those senses that say, danger, don't do this. Over the last couple years, as we have seen fentanyl introduced in the greater DFW area, we've seen a really alarming trend over the last several months. You may remember around Halloween last year, the news reports of rainbow fentanyl. We had parents across the country double and triple checking their kids' trick-or-treat bags to make sure rainbow fentanyl didn't get introduced into them. One of the things that it taught me, and it showed me, was that the consumers who are asking for this, they're not so concerned that it looks like a legitimate pharmaceutical. There's no faking it anymore. We don't have to pretend it's an oxycodone or a Percocet or a Xanax. We're going to make it pink. We're going to still put the M and the 30 stamps on it. That, in the real world, is a 30 milligram oxycodone pill. But when it's tie-dye or pink or purple, there is nobody here who would purchase that on the street and somehow convince themselves that it came from a legitimate pharmaceutical company. So times are changing. People are now asking, could I get some Fent pills? Now, there may be others, and there have been thousands of others who were seeking at medication or that interest in, I need to relax, I'm studying way too hard, and I need just to calm down. Oh, a buddy of mine has a Xanax. Here, take half. Take the whole thing. How can you tell? If you do not obtain a prescription drug from your doctor and go to a pharmacy where you pick it up and it has a bottle with your name on it with dosage instructions of how to take it, you cannot take that chance. There was a young man I met several years ago named Steve. He was 27, and he found himself sitting across the table from two DEA Special Agents looking at several years in prison. Steve had been arrested for trafficking pills and was set to face several years of incarceration. And I asked him to kind of tell me his story. How did he end up here? He's in his late 20s. And he says, hey, look, I started smoking marijuana when I was in 8th grade. Did my parents know about it? Yeah. But at the time, they weren't willing to address it. They told me afterwards that they thought it was just a phase. It was something that they weren't willing to take on because it was a phase in my life that I needed to figure it out on my own, and that too should pass. and they would be fine with just allowing it to be that blip on the radar of coming of age and move on. But by his sophomore year in high school, Steve had a procedure that probably many of us are very familiar with. He had his wisdom teeth taken out. And that dentist, back at the time, prescribed him 30-day supply of Vicodin. Now, Steve came from a two-parent household, a nice, gated community. Dad worked a lot. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. But it wasn't a bad neighborhood riddled with crime. He wasn't a latchkey kid. He wasn't involved in gangs. He didn't get in trouble in school. So his parents really had no reason not to trust him. So up that pill bottle went to his bathroom, and it was with instructions from his parents, take as needed. Well, that prescription lasted only half of that 30 days. And then he started looking to the streets to then make up the difference because of now the addiction that he was feeling. Over that course of the next several months, Steve began eating up to 23 pills a day. He said his parents, they missed the boat. He said his mom was so concerned that he was going to get a DUI in high school, and that was going to dog his career and college for years to come, that he'd come home, she'd give him a hug, and she'd smell his breath. He says, you know what, I didn't drink. He goes, but the one thing that she just completely missed is I was higher than a kite because I had just eaten 2 or 3 pills right before I came home. Steve's parents refused to acknowledge that there was an issue. Those are his words, not mine. Steve recognized, however, that you just couldn't take a chance. You couldn't take a chance that that pill that you were buying on the street or that pill that you got as a free sample from the guy who gets you your THC edibles actually is what it says it is. So what do we do, Agent Chavez? How do we fix this? Where do we start? Is it law enforcement? Is it their problem? Do we need to get stiffer penalties to maybe deter drug traffickers from doing this? Well, maybe it's a treatment issue. Maybe we need to have more just robust treatment centers, to be able to rehabilitate those who have already fallen victim to a substance abuse disorder. Well, wait, what are the schools doing? I haven't heard from the dean or the principal. I mean, are they doing anything? The answer is sure. All of us could be doing more. But it starts a little closer to home because it is at home where it starts. This isn't the 80s or the 90s with McGruff the crime dog or a DARE program where we leave it to somebody else for a 20-minute presentation to teach our kids about drug prevention and just cross our fingers and hope for the best. This is different. Fentanyl in this form is different. Grains between life or death is different. We must educate ourselves, but have a conversation. Sit around that kitchen table or in the living room and have a conversation with your kids or your brothers or your sisters. Be prepared. Be prepared to hear answers that you might not want to hear. Yeah, Dad. I tried it a few times a while back, but it wasn't for me. Or, Mom, some of the girls had it in the locker room. I've seen it around. How are you going to act? How are you going to react? Educate yourself on what it is, how to prevent it, because the consequences are irreversible. DEA's campaign of One Pill Can Kill, I encourage you to scan that QR code or visit our website with some no-nonsense information on how you can get ahead of this. We don't want your loved one's face in the lobby of DEA headquarters. We want you all to be able to enjoy your family members for years to come. Because in this particular case, truly, one pill can kill. Thank you.